unchanging. God is ever true. God who loves you so. So be patient with what is, and everything is yours. All you need, your God will give. For with God in your heart, and your faith strong in Him, know you will forever live. For God is unchanging. God is ever true. God who loves you so. Let nothing disturb you or take away your peace. Make your home, make your home, make your home in God.
Good evening for those of you in the UK. Good morning, perhaps, to someone in New Zealand. Maybe we should simply say good day to all who are joining us from around the world. We are pleased that you are sharing this time with us. Those of you whom we have met personally, and all the rest of you who are friends we just have not yet met.
Yes, that's correct.
Our presentations are broadcast every week, Tuesday, at 8 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time in the UK and 3 p.m. on the eastern coast of the US.
Daylight savings time.
Yes. And so we invite you to join us at this time, or if it's not possible for you, you can pick up our program when it is posted on David Holmes' web YouTube site. Just go to YouTube and key in a Hermit's Journal, and the program should turn up numbered for you to follow. In our last program, we were beginning a new period in my early hermit life, which we entitled The Time Between hermitages, that is. I spent this time of waiting for the curtain to go up on my unknown future back at my monastery in Canton, Ohio.
Yes, the last time we met, we were sharing your experiences as you returned from that initial 3-month trial period, returning to Santa Clara Monastery, where you were trying to evaluate the results of this quote-unquote experiment.
Yes.
And you have shared that experiment with us largely through the pages of the very prayer journal that you were keeping at that time in 1989. And we're sharing your experiences through your eyes and through your feelings at the time. When you came back, you felt that your belief in your calling as a hermit had been validated by your Jesuit director, who had assured you that all the signs seemed positive. God was calling you, but apparently no bishops were.
That was what was apparent.
You had been denied permission to continue your solitary life in the small house on the church property in Ansted, West Virginia, where you had been living during this 3-month trial period. Nonetheless, you seemed certain enough of your hermit vocation to proceed with applying for a 3-year period of exclaustration.
Yes.
Which will remind our viewers is a formal permission from Rome to live outside the monastery walls while still remaining a member of the Poor Clare order. Now, Karen, it seems from what you shared with us of your journal in these past few months as well, that you found your answer to the one central question about your calling to solitude and silence, but it seems like the questions of where and when and how are still, as you return to the monastery, still largely unresolved. So tell us how you were dealing with this at this point.
Well, it's one thing to know what you want to do, but you really can't do it until you know where or when or how. So I was really feeling pretty frustrated at this moment. And to claim that my trust in God was so complete that it was lived up to what the Franciscans call the perfect joy that Francis described for Brother Leo was really not a true picture of my inner state at this time. And it seems like every entry in my journal started out with something like, it's cold and gray, it's chill and rainy, which is the typical weather in northeastern Ohio in early spring, and happened to be an excellent mirror of my inner climate. But there is this wonderful story that the Franciscans cherish, and I was wondering, Paul, would you summarize and share it with our readers?
This is, for those of you who may be wondering, as Karen says, what is perfect joy, as Francis described it to Brother Leo? This is a very interesting vignette in a work that's called The Flowers, the Little Flowers of St. Francis. And it dates back, it's one of the earliest documents that we have about the life of Francis. Anyways, the incident is a little bit long to recount in its fullest detail, but I'd like to summarize the way the story goes. It was one winter day that St. Francis was coming to St. Mary of the Angels, the Portiuncula, which was his customary residence there outside of Assisi. And he was walking with Brother Leo on a very bitterly cold day from Perugia, the nearby city of Perugia. And as they walked along, Francis called out to Brother Leo, who was walking a bit ahead of him, and said, "Brother Leo, even if the friars minor in every country give a great example of holiness and integrity and good edification, nevertheless, write down and note carefully that perfect joy is not in that." Well, over the course of another 2 miles, Francis keeps interrupting Leo's journey, calling out to him and giving him all these positive and beautiful scenarios of gospel life and prayer and holiness and self-sacrifice and all of these things, ending each time he calls out to Brother Leo, "But note and carefully write down that perfect joy is not in that." Well, finally, after about 2 miles of several interruptions, Brother Leo turns to Father Francis in amazement and also a bit of exasperation,
Yes.
and says, "Father, I beg you in God's name, tell me then where perfect joy is." And so this is what Francis replies. When we come to St. Mary's of the Angels, where they were headed, soaked by the rain and frozen by the cold, all soiled with mud and suffering from hunger, and we ring at the gate of the place, and the brother porter comes and says angrily, "Who are you?" And we say, "We are two of your brothers." And he contradicts us, saying, "You're not telling the truth. Rather, you are two rascals who go around deceiving people and stealing what they give to the poor. Go away." And he does not open for us, but makes us stand outside in the snow and cold, rain, hungry, until night falls. Then, if we endure all those insults and cruel rebuffs patiently, without being troubled, and without complaining, and if we reflect humbly and charitably that that porter really knows us, and that God makes him speak against us, oh, Brother Leo, write that perfect joy is there. Well, Francis doesn't stop there. He continues to heap woe and misery upon woe and misery, and just describes the situation going from bad to incredibly worse. And finally, at the end, he says, and here now the conclusion, Brother Leo. Above all the graces and gifts of the Holy Spirit which Christ gives to his friends is that of conquering oneself and willingly enduring sufferings, insults, humiliations, and hardships for the love of Christ. For we cannot glory in all those other marvelous gifts of God because they are not ours, they are God's. As the apostle says, "What have you that you have not received?" But, Francis concludes, we can glory in the cross of tribulations and afflictions because that is ours. And so the apostle says, "I will not glory save in the cross of our Lord Jesus Christ." Well, Karen, you were hardly crucified to the cross at this point, but your situation was one that you've described as being between the rock and the hard place.
Yeah, it certainly felt that way. And for me to claim that my trust in God was so complete at this point that I was waiting there in perfect joy, facing all these unknowns, would hardly be a true description of my inner state.
Mm.
It seems like every entry in my journal was about the weather in northeastern Ohio, and also a mirror of my own inner. I couldn't claim what the Jesuits would call holy indifference,
Mm-hmm.
which was the ability to not care one way or the other, but to be content,
Mm-hmm.
to be patient. And as you know, patience isn't and never has been my long suit. And felt I was really being stretched to the limit at this point. There was one scripture passage which really seemed to speak to my condition. Another term from the Jesuits, as they say. And I was wondering, Paul, if you would share that with our
Sure.
viewers.
Sure.
It took place after a great miracle had happened.
Yes, Jesus had fed 5,000 people in the 6th chapter of St. Mark. And in Mark's gospel, that's immediately followed by this incident. It says in verse 45 that Jesus insisted that his disciples get into the boat and precede him to the other side toward Bethsaida. while he himself dismissed the crowd. When Jesus had taken leave of them, he went off to the mountain to pray. As evening drew on, the boat in which the disciples were was far out on the lake, while he was alone on the land. Then, seeing them tossed about as they tried to row with the wind against them, Jesus came walking toward them on the water. The time was between 3 and 6 in the morning. He meant to pass them by. When they saw him walking on the lake, they thought it was a ghost, and they began to cry out. They had all seen him, and they were terrified. Jesus hastened to reassure them. Get a hold of yourselves. It is I. Do not be afraid. He got into the boat with them, and the wind died down. They were taken aback by these happenings, for they had not understood about the loaves. On the contrary, their minds were completely closed to the meaning of the events. And so, was it that part about getting a hold? Did you hear the Lord saying, get a hold of yourself, Karen? Don't be afraid, it's me.
I wished I'd heard anything at that point. I had written down in my journal, I feel like the apostles after the miracle of the loaves and fishes, uncertainly embarking across the sea in the dark and the wind. Jesus had still not joined them. When I do finally see you again, Lord, will it, at first, seem very frightening? I long to hear you say to my miserable and depressed spirit, it is I, do not be afraid. Once you're back in my boat, suddenly it'll come aground, I'm sure. It'll be at the shore, wherever that may be, that I have been approaching through the dark. But right now, I feel so alone on this dark and tossing sea. Once more, I'm in what the Jungians call a night sea journey. And I was feeling exposed on this turbulent surface of the water and not at all comfortable with what could happen. I couldn't predict what Father Rock's experience with the bishop would have been, but I do want to hear you calling me, love. But where? The apostles looked for you everywhere, but they never expected to see you walking across the water to them.
Mm-hmm.
So, how are you going to surprise me?
The Lord does surprise us. And it sounds as though you were beginning to sense at least the intimations that where you had been looking and where you had been setting your heart, or at least your mind and your thoughts, was not where God was going to be drawing you and where God was not to be calling you. But you were left with nothing. I mean,
Yeah,
you were
a delightful place.
Yeah, you were, which is when we begin to be faced with the idea that we have to let go of our own, what we have our hearts set on, what we have our ideas and plans focused on, and truly wait for the Lord. It seems there's always that point where we feel like Karen was expressing, tossed about on the waves and waiting in the dark, and we really don't know. We suspect that the Lord is leading us somewhere, but we have no idea of the where.
Or even how he's going to be with us.
Right.
But I still looked through scripture and still could, it was one rather reliable place where I could get at least a hint.
Mm-hmm.
And that Sunday, which was the third Sunday of Easter, the gospel for that morning meant a lot to me at that time.
Uh-huh.
And I was wondering if you would share
Sure.
that with us.
I get right here.
Mm-hmm.
That gospel is from John's gospel, and it takes place, of course, it's one of the Easter gospels, so it takes place after the resurrection, and it's an account of how Jesus appeared to the disciples up at the lake, again, on the shore of the lake. And the way this incident starts, there are several of the disciples, probably about four or so are named: Simon, Thomas, Nathaniel, and James and John, so 5.
At least.
And at least the ones that are named here. And it says that Simon Peter said to them, this is starting in verse 3, Simon Peter said to the others, "I'm going out to fish." "We will join you," they replied, and went off to get into their boat. All through the night they caught nothing. Just after daybreak, Jesus was standing on the shore, though none of the disciples knew that it was Jesus. He said to them, "Children, have you caught anything to eat?" "Not a thing," they answered. "Cast your net off to the starboard side," he suggested, "and you will find something." So they made a cast and took so many fish that they couldn't haul the net in. Then the disciple Jesus loved cried out to Peter, "It's the Lord!" On hearing that it was the Lord, Simon Peter threw on some clothes, he was stripped, and jumped into the water. Meanwhile, the other disciples came in the boat, towing the net full of fish. Actually, they weren't far off from land, no more than 100 yards. When they landed, they saw a charcoal fire there with a fish laid on it and some bread. "Bring some of the fish you just caught," Jesus told them. Simon Peter went aboard and hauled ashore the net, loaded with sizable fish, 153 of them. In spite of the great number, the net was not torn. "Come and eat your meal," Jesus told them. None of the disciples presumed to inquire, "Who are you?" for they knew it was the Lord.
Mm-hmm. And as always, only a certain section really spoke directly to me. I wrote in my journal that morning, "It's a clear, blue, bright sunrise. Almost unbelievable, but heart-lifting. Jesus' question, 'Have you caught anything, children?' was followed by their response, 'Not a thing.' I admire this humility and the truthfulness which is ready to admit out loud failure to catch anything. I tend to rephrase failures or things which I wish looked a little different and end up with a series of, if not quite falsehoods, at least misrepresentations, even to myself within. But where am I right now? No place at all, Lord. Have I found anything to live or anywhere to live as a hermit? Last night, as I sat for a while after night prayer, I felt the need to just let go of the possibility of going to Hazard, Kentucky, and to cease asking about a place there. Rather, I need to be open to wherever you may be calling me, to wherever and however the door may open. This brings a measure of peace in the present moment as I cease my desperate hammering on what feels like a closed door. I'm not meant to go there, at least not now. And if not there, where, my love? Would the other Kentucky diocese, Covington, with Bishop Hughes, be open to me? Or perhaps the Cleveland diocese? And you say, cast your net on the starboard side, and you will find something. And I ask, well, where's the starboard side, Lord? I'm not a fisherwoman.
Good questions. Where's the starboard side? But the starboard, it's not so much just where's the starboard side, as we know, it's where's your starboard side.
Yes,
you know.
that was it.
And, I can't help reflecting that as you move through all of this, it is somewhat reflective about the disciples being in that boat at night on the sea that had just been calmed by the Lord when he got in with them. But at the same time, the end of the incident is they didn't really understand. Their minds were completely closed to the meaning of the events around them. And so often, our minds are closed. We can't understand. We feel in our hearts that God has opened one door for us or has invited us on one particular path, and then how to actually go there is very opaque. There don't seem to be any answers. The means to do this are not readily at hand. They're not at all apparent. And we can't understand why we're stuck. And our minds, it's almost like that, the disciples' minds being completely closed to the meaning of the events. And in our darkness and in our stuckness, we grab at one thing after another. Well, maybe it's this. Well, maybe it's that.
Yeah.
Well, maybe, where what's really being, what we're really being invited to is to begin the process of actually just letting go and waiting on the Lord to reveal where the starboard side, where our starboard side is. And that will happen in his time, not by our making all kinds of frantic phone calls.
Yes.
So, how did you describe your feelings in your journal at this time?
Well, this was just the same day, which had started out so bright and sunny. And by early afternoon, I'm journaling. I feel restless and rotten. Snowflakes.
That's blunt.
Well, yeah. I'm trying to be true. The snowflakes are blowing hither and yon with bulbous gray clouds obscuring the sun. The wind stung tears in my eyes when I was out walking. Not a pleasant experience. I don't feel pleasant. I didn't even get up at my usual time when I awakened, deciding I was just too tired. The truth is, I was trying to avoid two miseries. One is my physical state. The other is dealing with this state of unknowingness and near despair. I find uprootedness is desperately uncomfortable. I owe letters to lots of people, but I don't want to write until I have something more to say than, well, I'm back, but hoping to leave sometime for somewhere. I really think it's even too soon to call Father Rock back. If I just knew how the Bishop of Lexington is disposed, I could at least begin to plan either a place elsewhere if necessary, or could count on finding some place near Hazard, Kentucky. Furthermore, I know that it's very hard to pray here. I find it difficult to settle into prayer, and I'm tempted to think, well, I'll pray when I'm back in solitude. But God knows when that will be, and I don't. It's the old story, the less you pray, the less you want to pray. And the converse is also true. So once I get into it, the momentum and the desire will grow and will assist. I plan to start this evening.
Well, that's a pretty straightforward and honest statement of the situation.
Yeah,
I mean, it sounds like that to me, and it's true. When we're in an internally a somewhat intolerable situation, we start doing the if only the circumstances were different, then I would be different.
right.
It's you know
Not so.
that's a false that's a false assumption, and it heads us in a totally wrong direction.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me, besides uh, feeling your feelings, were you doing anything else?
Well, thank you for that. But you asked, if I remember rightly, I tried to do what the one thing I knew needed to be done. I decided to go car hunting. And my journaling about that is pretty straightforward too. First of all, I found out that I could look in the newspapers, but then I would have to call the place about seeing the car that they might still have on their lot. The car, the van, the truck, whatever. And this scares me silly because I don't know the first thing about what to ask. But I'm learning that to do this is part of the package of setting up on my own. Sister Joan Marie, our abbess, said that I could purchase a vehicle for a maximum of $4,000. I'd prefer that it be only $2,500 if I was getting a good car. So I began my assault on the world of used cars, and I have learned some useful things, like no, I do not want stick shift, even if it costs less, and that Broncos seem much larger than I want, but I still do definitely want a four-wheel drive vehicle so that I can more confidently drive the difficult roads that I'm expecting. For Lord, I just feel like I cannot go on just waiting. It's just in total ignorance of the Kentucky possibility. So I'm going to call Rock tonight and see whether he has any hope to hold out for me. If not, then I'll have to turn, but where? Lord, you say, All that the Father gives me shall come to me. No one who comes to me will I ever reject. Dearest, I have come to you. Do not let your church reject me from the Lexington Diocese. And when I finally got in touch with Rock, he said that the bishop would tell him more after I had written to him, that he was very non-committal when Rock brought up the possibility. So at least I know that he wasn't immediately hostile to having a hermit in his diocese. And I realize I probably should have called Rock sooner than this. For being a busy man, his getting in touch with me wasn't too likely until he found time. He did tell me that Bishop Kendrick would speak further with Rock when he'd heard from me. And Rock is going to be gone for 2 weeks very soon. So I wondered maybe I'd better call the bishop rather than write. So I did call his office, but his secretary advised me to write since the bishop is out more than he is in at that point. So I've composed something, trying to combine the practical points that I could come up with the faith vision that I have. And I hope that he'll not see this as a future or even present burden, but maybe even a blessing for the diocese. Rock's letter, which I had a copy of, covered all the basics so well. He even mentioned Father Stan's appraisal, and Father Stan was personnel director for the friars, and Father Locamp's bit about the canon law, for he was canon lawyer for their friary. So now all I have to do, again, is sit back and wait.
And that's really hard for you.
Yes,
That is really
as you
difficult.
know, waiting is not my long suit.
I
Patience.
think maybe, going back to what you said about the scriptures speaking to you, and you say, no one, quoting John's gospel, no one whom I have called will I reject. I think it just sounds to me like you could handle out and out rejection better than you can handle being put on hold.
Yes.
Which is really, the Lord does not reject anyone who comes to him. But Jesus never said that he wouldn't put you on hold for a while. But when the Lord puts you on hold, he's holding you.
Yes.
He is holding you. And it's time for you to let go and allow yourself to be held by God and to learn to wait on the Lord. And that's true for all of us in every life. However active, however busy, whether explicitly given to ministry or not, we all of us have to learn to wait. And if we take our spiritual life seriously, whatever state of life we are in, we have to learn to wait on the Lord. However, in eremitic life, waiting on the Lord is a hallmark. It's at the heart. It's practically at the center of what eremitic life is. As we've said so often in the past, eremitic life is not about doing. It's not about getting things done. It's simply about being there, waiting on the Lord. It's very much, and even as, or perhaps not even, but especially in the difficulties, it's very much what T.S. Eliot, in the words that T.S. Eliot framed so well, he said, I said to my soul, be still and wait. In the darkness shall be the light, and in the stillness the dancing. Waiting, especially waiting on the Lord, who has put you on hold in his own hands, is perhaps one of the most difficult lessons that we have to keep on learning over and over and over again.
And I think this was a learning time for me, even though I didn't recognize it as such. I did end up finding a vehicle, and it was a green and white Bronco, which I felt had a pretty nice interior, and I felt fairly confident that I could handle it once I got used to it. Already I had, in practicing driving it around the lot there, the brakes seemed to require more pressure than I was used to when driving. But we had the permission, and I did go out with the caretaker from the monastery to purchase the Bronco, which I named Brenda.
Brenda the Bronco.
Yes, I decided I was going to give it a feminine name. But actually, she frightened me. It was really big. And I realized that the car is just taking up an awful lot of my attention just now. So I'm just going to have to let it. That's where I am at the moment. It'll be in my prayer. But once it is absorbed as a reality, I'll be able to let it go. But I need to be patient with the process. I was given permission to buy it, and then I wrote, the first reading for today was dealing with the history of Israel. And I hear something resonating within me about how you indeed led them out of Egypt, where they had flourished and then were enslaved, to their holy mountain and the promised land with an outstretched arm. I choose to believe that you are doing so for me also, my love. In the end, even the Pharaoh, or the bishop, will acquiesce to your plan for me. And then I wrote more about my experiences with this frightening Brenda Bronco. I wrote, I drove Brenda around the parking lot at the monastery for a few minutes. I had a hard time getting it started and running smoothly. It handled a bit roughly, and so I came in feeling like I've just gotten too big a vehicle to be really useful, which is rather a downer. But I know that I did search, I prayed, I tried to discern what might be the most practical, and this seemed it. If it's not the best choice, I don't think it's a bad one. Because I have to work, just because I have to work some to learn how to control this lady easily. I just need to get used to her.
In some ways, this too is a mirror of yourself. How to control this lady? You need to get which lady are you trying to control? And you have to get used to her. Really, which her are we talking about?
Oh, you've made a point.
But the thing is, you are preoccupied with this vehicle right now, but really your agenda isn't only your obviously having to get a vehicle to get to your ultimate destination. But you have some other plans on your mind right now that are more immediate.
I did. My reason for wanting to have this vehicle at this point was that I had decided that the following Saturday I wanted to drive back to Ansted for a week. It'll be sad there, too. In fact, it'll be sad anywhere until I know where our next home together will be. And I could get very distressed over the logistics of how I'll move my stuff, etc. But that's vain speculation at this point. I am yours. You are calling. I know not where. And like Abraham, I am wandering in the promised land, not knowing where to pitch my tent. No matter how hard I try, I cannot pray like I desire here at the monastery. But I've just simply recognized that I can't realistically expect to know about anything at this point until a month, maybe. Why am I so desperate at this point? And I asked one of my friends there at the monastery, Mary Kay, if she would drive down with me. And she approached our abbess, and we got permission to go. She really wanted to go with me. So I wrote, that's a step towards doing something. I think I'll do best by taking a step towards that. And I'll pack everything up and bring it back to the monastery. I think at first I'd hoped I could take it directly from Ansted to wherever.
Mm-hmm.
And that was beginning to look long distance planning. So I took Brenda out and filled her up with gas, nearly $25 worth, and she ran much happier on a full tank. Although there was a little scare for me getting there when the engine faltered in the midst of traffic, but it caught again through no skill of mine, so that left me a little shaky. But however, it's one more experience that I don't have to fear so much because I've gone through it.
And banishing those fears remains maybe not your highest priority, but it's still a very strong issue, ongoing issue with you.
Yes.
Your fearfulness and how that works with your spiritual life, how our fears and our anxieties and how they play with our relationship with the Lord. And it reminds me again of something that I quoted in one of these presentations several weeks ago. And I remember at the time I had to paraphrase it because I couldn't exactly put my finger on where it was from. But actually, the author is John McMurray, who I believe is a Jesuit. Anyways, he had a really striking remark about fear. And fear is something that none of us is a stranger to. But how it works when we put fear in the context of our spirituality and our spiritual growth and our relationship with the Lord, here is where the striking remark is. McMurray says this. He says, the maxim of an illusory religion, so a religion that's filled with illusions, runs this way. Fear not, trust in God, and God will see that none of the things you fear will happen to you. Another way of talking about illusory religion is magical thinking. That's just magical thinking.
Yes.
On the contrary, he says, the maxim of a real religion, authentic religion, is fear not. The things that you are afraid of are quite likely to happen to you, but they're nothing to be afraid of.
Yes.
Maybe we better just leave it on that. As you prepare for this journey, and again, the themes, your Exodus themes are coming out. You found that during that 3-month period, you found that freedom.
I did.
And yet now that whole experience is very, very shaky. You don't know if will be able to find it again, reclaim it, hold on to it. It's a very anxious time.
Mm-hmm.
But even in the midst of all that, I think you hear the Lord saying to you, even if it's very quietly under the din of having to do all these other things, is fear not. All the things you're afraid of could well happen to you, but they're nothing to be afraid of.
He was teaching me that even by little steps. For instance, just having the experience of a vehicle die in traffic,
Mm-hmm.
which is frightening.
Yeah.
But after you've been through it,
Yeah.
I felt like, well, that wasn't so bad. And I think other things have said, I remember people saying to me, where did you get the courage to do this? This was years later.
Uh-huh.
And I really didn't have any courage at all. I was dealing with fears the whole way.
Well, somebody I think once said that having courage is not to be confused with having no fear. It's just not allowing the fear to totally control you or to overwhelm you. Courageous people have their fears. They just don't let the fears overwhelm them or control them.
You act in spite of them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I kept returning to, I knew the one thing I did know, God was calling.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to thank you again for joining us today. And we're going to be dealing with the question for a while. Will Karen have enough patience to wait? If you wish to contact us, you can find us at our website, www.ravensbreadministries.com, where we have a Contact Us page, where you can contact us and ask any questions you want. You can email us directly at our email address, pkfredette@frontier.com. And you can also join in the wonderful discussion that is going on at our blog, www.ravensbreadministries.com/blog. There's some beautiful sharings going on there.
As always, we'd like to spend the last few minutes together with you this evening in quiet prayer and reflection. We've heard a lot this evening in this presentation about anxieties and fears, about feeling at sea and learning how to wait, and the difficulties of growing in patience and trust in the Lord, and not of interpreting roadblocks as rejections, but invitations to learn how to wait.
Mm-hmm.
And so with that in mind, we close with another prayer by Ted Loder. O Holy One, we hear and say so many words, yet yours is the word we need. Speak now. And help us listen. And if what we hear is silence, let it quiet us. Let it disturb us. Let it touch our need. Let it break our pride. Let it shrink our certainties. Let it enlarge our wonder. Once again, we want to take this opportunity to thank you for joining us this evening. We wish you well, and we ask God's blessing on you as we say good night.
God be with you.